My name is Aharon Solomons from Freedivers. We teach all levels of AIDA courses. I'm an AIDA instructor trainer. We also train people for competitions or for records. And we also do remote coaching for either specific problems or people who really want to train and are committed to really progressing. This evening is about a hot topic, equalization. We've talked about equalization before. Let me just recap. We talked about frenzel, we talked about how to analyze whether you were doing a correct frenzel or not. We talked about BTV, hands-free equalization, and that's all well and good until, at the very minimum, 40 meters. Nearly everybody can manage to do a frenzel successfully till 40 meters and doesn't need really any other technique to get to 40 meters. However, a lot of people can do it till 60 meters without any further change of technique. A lot of this will depend on flexibility. However, here's the thing. Beyond somewhere between 40 and 60 meters, we need to change our technique. This has been traditionally called mouthfill. Eric Fattah wrote a long document on the subject. I think there are a few people who actually finished reading the document, and I'm sure it was extremely helpful. However, there are different ways of doing this. In my opinion, there is not a single template for a successful mouthfill beyond this particular position. What I mean to say is we don't have a particular technique that we can all aspire to and will be successful for everybody. Everybody is different. If you take an aggregate of the most successful deep divers, you'll find surprisingly that there are an awful lot of differences in how they deal with this. This is quite acceptable. What I want to talk about first of all is what we have to set up before we start looking at a technique. These are sort of common denominators, if you will, that one needs to establish for depth training. The first thing, one of the most important, is the question of relaxation. Relaxation is absolutely critical for good equalization at depth. As a matter of fact, if you tense up, you're nearly bound to lose it, and that's the end of your pursuit of the depth for that particular dive. That's all very well, but then we have to look at preconditions for relaxation. One of the preconditions is confidence that I know that the dive is within my capabilities. In order for the dive to be within my capabilities, we have to avoid doing some things and we have to do other things. The thing that we have to avoid is making any big jumps in depth, any dramatic increases in depth from one dive to the next. It's very difficult to approach with confidence a dive where you're really making a leap into the unknown. So that's a very, very important precondition. The next thing is that the last dive that you did before that should have been successful. Now, my definition of successful is that you were capable of equalizing at the bottom, not a few meters before the bottom, but at the bottom, and you still had the capability of going another few meters. This is very, very important for setting up your confidence for approaching a deeper dive. Then you can consider adding 1 or 2 meters to your depth, not huge jumps. 10 meters is obviously a ridiculous jump. People have made leaps like this into the blue before. Sometimes they've been successful, sometimes they haven't been successful. It's a hit and miss operation. If you really want to be consistently successful, the path to being consistently successful is not to make the big jumps. That's the first thing. Now, before you approach equalization, it's very, very important that you have certain physical preparation specifically for equalization. That is that you have flexibility, particularly in the whole thoracic area, particularly in the neck and the throat. These are extremely important factors. Some people put a big emphasis also on mouth exercises of various kinds. I personally don't find them absolutely necessary, but if they're like chicken soup. If they don't help, they won't hurt. The thoracic flexibility is absolutely essential. The more flexible you are, the better the equalization is going to be. The greater depth at which you can take a mouthfill successfully, and you'll find it a lot easier to bring up air and to go down underneath your residual volume. So these are kind of preconditions. Training. Let's get on to specific training a little bit later down the line. Just a few comments about techniques. I'm not going to recommend a specific technique because I don't believe that a specific technique works for everybody. As a matter of fact, there's been a lot too much imitation of at least one specific technique, and a lot of people have not been able to master that technique and have therefore disqualified themselves from finding other solutions, which is a great pity, because there certainly are other solutions. There is not a single template for this. The most common template that is offered to people is doing a frenzel maneuver with full cheeks and using the air in the cheeks to facilitate the frenzel. For a lot of people, this is not successful. They spend hours doing all sorts of oral gymnastics to try and make the thing successful. Like trying to separate the action of your epiglottis and keeping your soft palate, for instance, in a neutral position. A lot of people find it very difficult to do that, if not impossible to do it, no matter how much they practice. Why should they? There are other solutions to this. An awful lot of those people will find that they actually lose the mouthfeel pretty early on. They're doing what we call swallowing it. Swallowing it means simply that every time they're using their tongue to equalize, they're opening the epiglottis, and the air is going back into the chest. Well, there are other solutions. Don't use the tongue. We have other things that we can use that are equally effective. We go into this in our remote coaching in detail. There are things that are borrowed from other techniques that I've described before, such as BTV. So the whole thing here is not to copy what you think somebody else is doing, or a particular technique that has been recommended for you, to you, but basically to do something else here. To work out whatever is easiest for you to do, and if you find an insurmountable problem, go to another technique. And find out, try and analyze what part of what you're doing isn't working. If you're going down to depth and you have full cheeks and you can't use the air in your cheeks, then the problem is with your soft palate. You're closing your soft palate. Question is, why? There are two common answers to that question, or three, to be honest with you. One, which is most of us manage to avoid, is going down with your head back, looking down the line. That isn't going to work. Okay, the other two reasons for losing the, for closing the soft palate, one is relaxation. If you get tense, it tends to shut. The other reason is that you haven't got your timing right. Timing is critical. Here's the thing, that these things are not often explained and they're not often understood correctly. We all know that as you get deeper and deeper, the pressure differentials become less and less. It would seem logical that we equalize more infrequently at depth. Actually, that's not usually the case. For most people, more frequent equalization avoids closing the soft palate. Timing is critical, so we do an awful lot of work in training for depth on timing for a particular depth. When we increase it, we alter our sense of timing. So it's something that we really have to understand, and we have to understand it almost subconsciously that there has to be an alteration here. The next thing is, which plays into the same subject, is topping up. We've heard a million different theories about topping up. An awful lot of people wait until they've nearly completely lost the mouthful before topping up. In my opinion, this is an excellent way to give yourself a trachea squeeze, because it requires a very dramatic movement to recover air. If we do frequent and small recoveries from a given depth, we will find that we avoid this problem and can work on increasing the depth at which we can do this. Again, here flexibility plays a huge part. Little top-ups are great, providing you're flexible. So that's a very important factor for that. Now, so the other thing is, okay, I've got air in my cheeks, I can't use it, we've covered that. How about the fact that the air is disappearing? Look, the air disappearing is no great mystery. It can't come out of your ears because your eardrums are blocking that. You will see immediately if you're squirting out air into the water, which is incredibly unlikely. By far the most likely explanation is that you are opening your epiglottis and the air is going back into your lungs. Question is, why is this happening? Again, let's go back over the checkpoints. Head position, maybe the chin needs to be a little bit more down. Swallowing, anything to do with the swallowing movement where you've incorporated that into an equalization will guarantee that you're opening your epiglottis. And of course, some people who are aggressively using their tongue at the same time are opening their epiglottis. There are two ways of attacking this. There are specific exercises for improving your closure of the epiglottis. One of them, just to make you aware of it, is practice taking a mouthful on the surface and swallowing immediately after the mouthful. This tends to close it. See if you can keep it closed all the way down. See how long you can preserve your mouthful. Other ways of doing it are very simple. That you put a nose clip on, you put water in your mouth, you put your head back, and you equalize using your technique of equalization. And then spit the water out into a glass and check to see if you've swallowed any. If you've swallowed any, you know what's happening. So you've got a pretty good check on what's happening with the epiglottis. That means that you are actually swallowing the water into your stomach. You're unlikely to be moving that down into your lungs. But this is one way of sort of teaching you to get in touch with the epiglottis. It's not exactly related to equalization problems, but it's a way of putting you in touch with this thing that you want to keep closed. There are plenty of soft palate exercises, varying from having your mouth open and breathing through the mouth, or with your mouth open, breathing in through the mouth, out through the nose, or in through the nose, out through the mouth. And all those are the basic gymnastics. There are others, such as blowing up a balloon, holding it and letting the air come out of your nose. It may even at first make a snoring sound. All these are for putting you in touch with what's going on. But will they solve a problem? Maybe, but in my experience, not very likely. The main thing is finding another way of getting around the problem. If the problem is that you're losing the airfield by going back into your lungs, you're moving your tongue. Can I equalize without moving my tongue? Yes, I can. thing is learn that technique. Get in touch with it, and it may become very, very effective. It may become very efficient for you. Again, these are things that we deal with in both our training programs and remote coaching. So basically, before we do anything else, if you're going to be doing remote coaching or if you're going to be doing training, your trainer's going to ask you these questions. Yeah, what's happening when you're down there? What's happening to the air? Where'd it go? Do you have it all locked up in your cheeks? Can't use it? Are you losing the airfill? Where are you losing the airfill? And only from that position can he proceed. It may be, as I say, a question of timing, that you're leaving too big a gap between your equalizations. It may be all kinds of things. Now, one of the other main issues here that's debated all the time is, what depth do I take a mouthful at? The accepted logic, which I don't totally buy into, is that the deeper you take the mouthful, the deeper you're going to go. Not necessarily true, because we strike a balance here. The deepest at which we can get a comfortable and full mouthful. I would rather go for taking a mouthful at 20 meters, training my lockup, making sure that I'm not losing it, yeah, and beginning top-ups at a certain depth after that, small top-ups, than I would attempting to take a mouthful at 30, 35 meters or deeper than that. First of all, any little act of mistiming on a deep mouthful will either guarantee you a poor mouthful or maybe even a trachea squeeze, because the movement for bringing up the air for that is already quite violent. You're already pushing a lot of pressure. So don't buy into all the accepted sacred cows of the deeper the better. This also can be a cover-up for something else. I take a deep mouthful and I think I can go deeper with it. I might be better off practicing with taking a mouthful shallower and seeing how long I can make that mouthful last me. In other words, where I have no epiglottis leakage at all. So there's a kind of give and take here. And this is something that you have to experiment with yourself if you're your own trainer, or you have to get a good trainer who you have a good dialogue with and who you trust, and he can work out for you your best timing for the whole of this performance. Let me go back. Too many people have been put off by the standard idea of a single way of doing it, of a single template, and they get absolutely stricken by the fact that they can't keep their soft palate in a neutral position and keep their epiglottis closed. Some people can do that, some people can't. Is there another solution for the people who can't? Definitely. This is the whole point. There definitely is. And sometimes it's an awful lot more successful. It's the same thing that I talked about when I talked about BTV. When I talked about BTV, I said that it was, my initial statement on that was that it was probably the hardest technique to teach somebody. There are, I steer clear of all these documents who give 14-stage progression to the eventual success story. People tend to get too involved in the thing. There are actually a few very, very simple exercises, and if you persevere with it, you'll get there. It's as simple as that. There will still be a percentage of people who may not be able to, but don't give up too soon. BTV is kind of the king of equalization methods because, first of all, for the depths up to your mouthfill, etc., it is the most effortless, the most instantaneous, and doesn't require any manipulation with your hands. And the fact that it is instantaneous, you can think it and do it. If I'm using my hands, I have to make a movement. Seconds pass, meters pass, before the actual event is accomplished. BTV is instantaneous. As I say, it's effortless if you've got the technique right. Now, it's also when you're going to approach mouthfill, there are elements of the BTV that can be of enormous help to you. So it's not something to be given up on quickly. And we see that it's helped an awful lot of our deeper equalizers, who quite a few of them switched from doing BTV in order to doing mouthfill. Now, what's exactly happening inside their mouth, you better talk to them. But it's not necessarily the classic template. There are a few of the deeper divers who are doing the classic template. Good luck to them. For some people it is, as I say, hit and miss operation. Now, training for this. The first training that we do on this is we do various exercises on totally empty lungs. We do not use FRC. FRC is classically defined as a passive exhalation after a normal inhalation, not a big inhalation and then a passive inhalation, but a normal inhalation like you might be taking in your room now. Okay, that's FRC. It's still a very, very, very imprecise measurement as far as I'm concerned. It's hard to quantify between one dive and the next. It's hard to quantify at all, translating it into depth, and therefore it can be very misleading when you're trying to teach a person equalization of depth. You don't know really whether he's improving or whether he's just taking aboard a bit more air, and he may not know himself. So we recommend exercises on totally empty lungs. There are people who criticize this and find it too drastic. There are people who probably never tried it in their life more than once. You very soon get used to it. It also builds up a lot of flexibility. And it's much easier to quantify and much easier to analyze what exactly is happening in your dive. Where you're losing the air, where your soft palate might be locking up. These things you can quantify in terms of to the meter. And if you like to do all sorts of weird mathematical equations, you can probably relate that to its equivalent on full lungs. I'm a bit suspicious of those things. Because there's a lot of factors that they don't take into consideration. However, it's a very good practice for finding out and getting in touch with the beginning solutions to equalization at depth. You can do comfortably 8 or 9 dives in a session that might be equivalent to deep dives without the risk of getting decompression sickness or anything else. I don't advise you to immediately on your first practice, never having done that before, attempt to do 8 repetitions. Obviously, these things have to be progressive and gradual. But it also shouldn't take you a month to get to 8 repetitions in a session. That's an awful lot of learning in a session. And it's incredibly beneficial. And instead of trying to achieve somebody else's idea of how you should be equalizing, try and figure out what's not happening for yourself or what is working. And don't get frantic about it. Now, when you've got that together and you manage to build up a good depth, I would say at least 10 meters on empty lungs. At least 10 meters. Then you can start doing drops. Drops are head down, equalization, simply dropping with a weight held in your hand that is attached by your line to the buoy on the surface. And it's obviously tied off at your target depth. And this brings in all kinds of other much more realistic factors here. You're not doing this, of course, on empty lungs, you're doing it on full lungs. I prefer at first to do it without packing, because packing brings in other elements. Don't just because you're doing it on full lungs immediately go to packing. We're still fact-finding. We're still trying to get timing and a lot of other things, timing, relaxation, all these things right. Now, the one of the factors that's bringing in is speed. You may have your equalization right if you can spend half an hour on each equalization. I mean, if you've got a good breath hold on empty lungs, you can do some remarkable things. But can you still do that when you're dropping at more than a meter per second? And this is where the crunch comes in. So head down drops are invaluable for giving you the confidence to know that I can do it at nearly any speed that I'm likely to be able to attempt or can do. We have to be careful with how much weight we're using for head down drops. We have to, of course, limit it at first, and everything is a question of fact-finding and gradual, systematic progression. So let's just backtrack a bit. 3 or 4 general factors. I want you to be able to note them practically in order. The first thing that is an a priori consideration for all equalization at depth is relaxation. Relaxation, we said, came from confidence. Confidence meant that we are not challenging into unknown territory our capabilities. The second thing is, which relates immediately from that, is gradual, systematic, methodical, and realizable progression in depth. That means, did I equalize successfully at the last depth? Did I still have air in my cheeks when I got to the target depth? The next thing, as an a priori condition, is flexibility. If we don't devote a considerable amount of time to flexibility exercises, we're limiting ourselves. I'm a stiff person. Oh, how many times have I heard this? I was so stiff I could barely bend or be bent if you heated me and oiled me before I went to India at 58. After 3 months in India, I was tying myself into pretzels. And without any particular special abilities. It's merely a question of gradual, sensible, and correct progression to gain flexibility. It's within the grasp of us all. It's only a question of work. Too many times I find people doing the wrong training. And they're absolutely fixated on it. This works for me, I'm going to do it this way. Well, good luck to you. Weight training. Why? I'm running 10 kilometers every day and 20 kilometers on Sunday. Good luck to you. What you're doing is exactly the reverse of what you should be doing. You're doing a lot of aerobic exercise. Now wait a minute, I thought when I went underwater I wasn't getting any air, so why the hell should I be training myself for aerobic exercise? This doesn't make any sense at all. I don't care how you break up the dive into the first part of the dive being aerobic and the second. This is all wild theory. Yeah. Fact of the matter is, it is fundamentally, unquestionably, an anaerobic event. And I don't care whether it has an aerobic element in it. You can say for the first few steps of the 100-meter sprint, it's an aerobic exercise. Yeah, go and tell that to somebody who's practicing the 100 meters at an Olympic level. It is an anaerobic event. So's freediving. Even more so. So what the hell you're doing aerobic stuff, unless you are hopelessly unfit, and you might be doing it for a limited period of time, only until you can get to the point where you can actually successfully do some anaerobic work. Other than that, it has no justification whatsoever. Most of the people who do these things spend a minimum time on runner's stretches. And usually they wonder why they're as stiff as boards. Some of the most successful divers I know are the people who are least fanatic about these kinds of training, whether it's weights or aerobic training or all the rest of this nonsense. But they are very insistent on flexibility. And so look where you want to put your effort. If you want to look good, if you want to be this week's cover for the Beach Boy magazine or something, then you have to relegate the fact that freediving is your secondary interest, it's not your primary one. There's enough to do preparing yourself for deep freediving without all these kind of things. Sometimes specific strength training, resistance training for specific things is profitable, but not lifting heavy weights. Heavy weights basically can mean bulk. That basically is an oxygen eater. And again, very few people actually need it. So that's more or less all I have to say on this for the moment. I really would like to take a break and see whether there are questions that have come in.
Don't be shy.
And so don't be shy. If you have questions, please ask them now. I'm going to give a pause for a couple of minutes and give you time to see if anything comes in. If it doesn't, that'll be the end of it for this session. Yeah.
You can tell them.
Have we got anything come in?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So still, if there are people who are not catching the live broadcast but are picking up the recording and they have questions, I'll do my best to answer them in 2 weeks' time when we have another webinar on what date is that?
The 22nd.
22nd. Yeah, but I'll give it another couple of minutes to see what's happening here.
Don't miss the moment. I think he's still alive. Do you think he's still alive? I mean the guy in the movie. You can tell them that we are hardly trying to distract you with the 300, which is one of your favorite movies.
Mm.
And that's the scene of this is Sparta.
Okay, haven't seen anything coming in at the moment. Can we just check to see whether there is? Okay,
They're shy.
nothing coming in, so we will meet again in 2 weeks. And if there are any questions that have come in from people who are watching this later on, I'll be happy to try and field them then. So, warm regard from all of us here at Freedivers. And until the, what is it, 28th? 22nd. And that's when I'll see you all again.
Hmm?
So...
Wait.
What?
Is it possible to do better there?
Marginatux. Is it possible to do better there in just 1 year?
Okay, a question has come in. asking whether it's possible to do BTV in one ear. To be honest, it very often starts that way. It usually means that you pretty much got the movement together. If it's the same ear and it's really, really stubborn, try moving your jaw a little bit. If that doesn't sort it, look to your diet. There's a thing called glue ear. In other words, sticky eustachian tubes caused by too viscous, too thick mucus. That's usually a question of somebody having, or a pretty good sign of somebody having a food allergy. It could be from milk products or it could be from wheat products. My advice on that one is very simple. Try doing without milk products for a week or 10 days, and then bring them back, and then try doing without wheat products for 10 days.
He's adding to what he asked and says, I can click on dry just one ear, but still cannot understand exactly what I'm doing.
Is it clicking as an equalizer or just
Yeah.
clicking? Yeah.
I presume that click is the sound of equalization.
Well, I mean, first of all, presume that you're doing it right. The next thing is that you may be surprised that actually you're equalizing in both ears, but you're only hearing a click in one ear. That's quite common. And you may be doing it 100% right. But I'll give you one tip about BTV. The first 2 or 3 have to be done very, very quickly on leaving the surface. If you leave BTV until 2 or 3 meters under, you're going to find it nearly impossible to do. So let's say that your first equalization has to be within, your head has to be within 60 centimeters of the surface when you're doing it. So if you start off right there, which you might start off by pulling down the line very slowly at first to see that you got it right, you can verify what's happening exactly. Another tip for those who also are capable of doing scuba, it is much easier to learn BTV on scuba than it is on just by beginning on freediving. And you can do it in shallow depths, 5 or 6 meters, and basically, if you can get yourself to doing that frequently, you can master that technique pretty easily, and then it is transferable. If we go down deeper, we may find that we can equalize BTV absolutely like clockwork till 30 meters, and then boom, it gives out. Combine it with a mouthfill.
Good question. Matt Molina.
Okay.
This was Fernando Pereira from the Azores, and he thanked you.
Okay.
Matt Molina is asking, someone can't do BTV. How would you recommend to equalize until the NTH depth? NTH presume mouthfill.
Good question.
I'm sorry, wait a minute, let me read the question again.
Someone cannot do BTV.
Right.
How would you recommend to equalize until the mouthfill depth?
Until you get to the mouthfill depth.
Good question.
This is a good question. Personally, I don't like changing technique too much. What I personally recommend is using your cheeks. Yeah, and keeping the eustachian tube open. And then doing top-ups. What's this? We've got a good discussion going on here about this one. So, Matt, that's my answer to that one. That I tend to avoid the frenzel whenever possible. I think that people who get in the habit of using frenzel will get certain bad habits from the frenzel in the mouthfill. And those are the people who, there are people who are very successful with that technique. I believe Sarah is, for one. But not everybody is. And I personally avoid it like the plague, because I do think that it's an invitation to losing mouthfeel. I do think it's an invitation to then having to do violent recoveries or violent deep mouthfills and all the rest of it, because the lockup isn't sufficiently strong to be able to hold it for the correct length of time. I hope I've answered that correctly. Have we got more?
Not at the moment.
Give him time to write.
So we'll give it another
Time to
second.
write.
Wait a minute, can we scroll here?
Yes, of course.
How do I do that? Let me see. Okay, that's
They'll
it.
go for the top, won't they?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. What was the last one? I don't see it down here.
Oh, the last
the
one
last
was
one's-
a message from
Right,
Thank you.
Fernando Pereira, who thanked you,
right.
and this is the guy from the Azores.
You may need to scroll up Aharon and see if anything else has come in.
Okay, we'll scroll up and see whether we've got anything else going here. Right. The technique of, we don't call our technique mouthfill, we call it cheek fill, because it's using cheeks. It is something that you actually have to learn. Once mastered, it's, in my opinion, a lot quicker, a lot easier, and a lot more efficient than using a frenzel with a full mouth. But this is best done under instruction. There are people who can work it out for themselves. Obviously I had to, because there was nobody to teach it to me at that particular time. So it's not impossible to work out for yourself. But getting somebody to teach you is a big shortcut. Okay, I think that's it from the questions for today. So again, look very much forward to seeing you at our next meeting on the 22nd. Thank you for attending, and very warm wishes and successful and safe diving.